Hi guys, it's Chris here, welcome back. In this video I want to talk about my experience learning Chinese. Some people have asked about it. I'm not going to claim to be an expert at Chinese, but I'm conversational. I can have one-on-one conversations. I'm at probably an intermediate level, and I think it might bring some value to those people learning languages, even though I don't practice anymore. So what methods did I use for Chinese? Well, if I think back, I first started learning it in probably 2008, and I started with Pimsleur. I think I went through Pimsleur 1, 2, and 3 in about under 2 months with each Pimsleur unit, or Pimsleur, what do you call it, volume. I think there are 30 episodes, and they recommend 1 per day, but I think I did 2 per day. After that, I remember on my way to and from work, I would listen to the Chinese Pod podcast. It was a guy, I think he might have been Swedish or like an Indian guy, and he lived in Taiwan, I found out later. And I would listen to that. So not the best way to study. By the time I got to Taiwan, which is around about January 2009, I was still fairly useless, but I was feeling the fire up my ass because, you know, I'm in the country now and I have to learn and I have to get by and I have to, you know, learn quickly. So at that point, I found the JAAP Method, or JapaneseAllTheTime.com website after searching, I should say, how to learn languages quickly. And I went through that entire blog. I scoured it, and I thought, well, I'm just going to apply this to Chinese. So with JAAP Method, you go through remembering the kanji, and then you go through sentence mining with a lot of immersion, in a nutshell, right? So I bought the same guy, Hasig, he wrote Remembering the Hanzi. And that only has 1,500 characters. And with Chinese, you need to learn a lot more than you do with Japanese. But I just went through that first 1,500 characters in the book. And then I was like, this is too boring. So I just went straight onto sentences and learned Hanzi, kanji as I went along. With Japanese, I didn't even do that stage. I think I just find that too boring. And I've realized I can learn kanji as I go along. I've done it before, and it seems to work okay. So after 2 or 3 months of going through that book, I went on to lingq.com, and that's basically what I used exclusively for my sentence mining. And specifically, I went through the units that they recommend, which is Who Is She? And I think Dining Out. So those are modules on lingq.com that they recommend for beginners. Yeah, I went through those. I remember finding them pretty hard, and I went through those with Japanese as well and remember finding them pretty hard. I think they try to cram in all of the different grammar points, and yeah, they try to cram in all different grammar points and words like can, have, want, should, directions, all into like this volume of stories. And I don't know, even for Japanese, I remember thinking this is a bit too difficult for a pure beginner. With Japanese, if you do want to learn on lingq, I would recommend the mini stories first. The mini stories module, that's a lot easier. Now I think they probably have more beginner units for Chinese, and I know on lingq they now have traditional Chinese. So when I was using it, they only had simplified. And I'm in Taiwan, so I wanted traditional. So I was like copying it over to Google Translate, changing it to traditional, because it is a direct match. And yeah, it was kind of tedious, but that's what I did. And I think I basically listened to lingq on an MP3 player over and over again while doing 20 words per day in Anki. So basically the JAAP method, but to Chinese, with Chinese. So over 9 months, I got to I remember looking at my Anki deck, and I think I got to 6,000 words in about 9 months. And I remember I was pretty lazy. Like, I remember weekends, I didn't study, because weekends I wanted to go out and have fun, and I didn't want to sit at home, you know, drilling or going through my reps. And then I would make it up on like Monday or Tuesday. So I was kind of slack. But in the evenings after work, I would watch TV. So I think I moved from lingq, and then I would watch TV. And because Chinese grammar is really simple, and I got to grips with it very quickly, I started just mining words, and I found I could get through my reps quicker. I just found that easier. So the last time I remember actually adding words to my Anki deck for Chinese, I think I would get home from work and I would watch variety TV shows. I remember they were called Ban Ban Tang and Wo Ai Hei Se Hui, which is like these panel shows, and they're made for teenagers, but To be honest, Taiwanese TV is pretty bad, and I just thought, I didn't watch it because I enjoyed it. I watched it because, you know, it was like younger people talking, you know, freely, and it was real Chinese. So after that, I think I remember breaking up with the girl I was with, and then I moved into my own place, and I started dating. And this was probably around about the 9-month mark. And I think I got in I started outputting at that point. And outputting is like going on dating apps and like chatting to a lot of people, even on Facebook. Back then there was no Instagram. People would chat more on Facebook and WhatsApp. And I just remember getting to know a lot more Taiwanese people at that point, and I would be outputting via text a lot. And the good thing about that is, I don't know, I think you're doing a lot in your head when you're doing that, because on one hand you're outputting, on the other hand you're reading, because the process of texting is actually recognition, not production, because you type in and it auto corrects the character and you're like, oh yeah, it's that character. So that was good. Texting people also helps you to structure sentences the way you should. So I would definitely recommend going through a phase of, I don't know, finding a friend or going on a bunch of dating apps in the country that you're in or wanting to go, and just practice texting, practice forming sentences. And then I started meeting a lot of people who didn't speak English, and I remember I was kind of surprised at myself. Like, I would, let's say, go on a first date with someone, and I remember coming home one day and thinking, I understood 80%, 85, 90% of everything that was said. I was able to sit there and have a conversation with someone, and I got like really good at that. So like I got good at like, and it's probably the level I'm at right now actually, I got good at meeting people, talking. If I go to a bar, like if I go like around my area, there's some small kind of cozy Japanese bars actually, even though I'm in Taipei, and they're the kind of places you sit down and you just end up talking to people. And in those situations I'm okay as well. I'm good at talking to people about basic stuff. I'm good at talking to randoms. Almost like my Chinese is at the level where I can talk to a new person. But then after that, going into like specific topics or going deeper, that's where I probably start to have trouble. After that point, I basically just lost interest. I lost interest in the language. I fell out of love with it, you could say. I started wondering, like, am I going to be here a long time? Apparently I was. And you know, the media wasn't interesting. I didn't want to sit there watching Taiwanese TV if I didn't have to, because I didn't enjoy it. Unlike Japanese, which has great pop culture, movies, anime and all that, Chinese, it's more difficult to find, or at least it was in 2009. And so I just stopped once I realized I could do what I wanted to do, and I could meet people and talk to them and have dates, and that's when I just stopped studying. Now, I think if I put another 6 months into Chinese, I could get a lot better. I'm not going to, but my recommendation for you would be, I mean, it's a subjective opinion, but would be to follow the same path, to follow that JAAP method, and you know, just stay consistent with it. I would definitely use LingQ. I started with LingQ with Japanese as well, and I think it's a good starting point because you have the written, you have the audio, and then you can get the audio on your phone as well through their app, and it's free. If you're not saving the links, but you don't have to, you can just copy and paste it and throw it into your flashcard program, and listening is free. So I would definitely recommend that. I mentioned I use Pimsleur. If you want to very slowly ease into the language and speed is not an issue for you, I don't regret using Pimsleur. I think I listened to a couple of episodes on Pimsleur with Japanese as well, maybe very early, maybe 2 years ago when it was my first attempt at studying Japanese. And it's 30 minutes per unit, and I remember, you know, listening on the train. And yeah, you do get a taste of the language and you kind of can get used to it, but I wouldn't go into Pimsleur 2, and I definitely wouldn't go into Pimsleur 3. I would just start going into the JAAP method after maybe the first Pimsleur, which is 30 days, which I think you could probably chop down to 15 days. Now, people who are studying Chinese, they worry about tones. I didn't worry about tones at all. And I can distinguish different accents in Chinese. I remember there was a point where I was kind of impressed with myself. I was working with this guy, and this new guy had joined the school that I was working at, and he'd been studying in the language school at the local university for 3 years. And he had this textbook. I wish I could remember what it was called. Integrated Chinese, maybe? And he had like the third book or the fourth book. And I was like, oh, is that your Chinese book? Can I check it out? And I looked through and I went to like the back page. I'm like, is this the hardest page? And he's like, yeah. And I could read it fine. And he's like, you can read that? And at that point, I'd probably been studying for 9 months officially, but probably a year, including that communication. And he'd been there probably 3 years. So I was definitely going quicker than your average Chinese student. Also, I knew a lot of foreigners here who also did the same kind of course. And while a lot of them, after 1 to 2 years, could speak Chinese, they did have a strong accent because they are following that communicative approach, which I talked about in my last video. When I talk to Taiwanese people, although this is a common thing, people will say, they'll say, oh, your Chinese is so standard. I can't tell how standard my Chinese is. I definitely must have an accent, but I know that I don't have as strong an accent as the people who I've met who studied through language school. So I didn't care about tones, I didn't practice tones, but I did immerse. I did do the AJAT or ACAT method, which includes immersion. So as in those 9 months, I wasn't speaking, I was immersing, I was listening every day to the LingQ units, watching a bit of TV, listening to Taiwanese radio a little bit. So, you know, I owe that to the accent I have, whatever it is. It's not native, but it's definitely not language school Chinese. So my recommendation to you, as far if you're worrying about tones, is learn to pay attention as you're listening, follow immersion, and don't worry about the tones. There's only 4 tones, and you can kind of get used to them anyway. They're not really that hard. As far as writing goes, I don't know how to write anything. Again, same with Japanese. It's not my focus. I don't care about it at all. Maybe I'll care later. So that's it. I just thought maybe there'd be some value in that story and my experience. Someone commented on my video a few weeks ago. They're learning Chinese. So maybe there's people, if anyone's watching and they're learning Chinese, applying the AJAP method to Chinese. That was my experience. So in a nutshell, get Anki, go on LingQ. You don't need to pay. Get the content from there if you're just starting. If you really are struggling, if that's too deep end for you, go try Pimsleur #1 in Chinese and kind of get used to it. Grammar in Chinese is very simple. I remember if I compare it to learning Japanese now, I remember being able to put sentences together way quicker, probably in months. With Japanese, I still don't feel like I can string a sentence together. So don't worry about grammar. With Chinese, you don't need to worry about grammar really at all. And I would say don't worry about tones. Just follow the method, mind sentences, listen a lot, and yeah, that's basically it. So if you have any more questions, if I've missed anything, drop them below and I'll get back to you. Take care.